The rain hit the porch light in a way that made everything look underwater. I opened my front door expecting a delivery. Instead, I found 3 kids I hadn't seen in months, soaked to the collar, 1 duffel bag between them, and a note taped crooked to my niece's jacket. Watch them. I'm never coming back. I read it once and told myself I'd misread it. I read it again and knew I hadn't. Somewhere behind me, a car engine faded down the block, already gone. My hands went completely still. A mother doesn't leave a note like that unless leaving feels safer than staying. Welcome back to Shadow Revenge Stories, where we talk about family, boundaries, and the quiet cost of always being the one who shows up. If you've ever been handed someone else's responsibility and told to just handle it, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you've ever been the dependable one in your family. Stay with me, because what started on that porch ends somewhere. None of us standing there that night could have predicted. My name is Renata Cole. I'm 36, and I work as a case manager at St. Aldine Hospital, which is a polite way of saying I spend my days figuring out which families are actually going to show up for the people who need them, and which ones are going to quietly disappear. I read intake forms the way other people read weather reports. I know what a crisis looks like before anyone says the word out loud. I married into the Cole family 8 years ago, and somewhere in those 8 years, I became the person my husband's sister called whenever her life came apart at the seams. Denise was 32, warm, funny, and permanently one bad week away from collapse. I covered her rent twice, no questions, because Marcus asked me to, and because that's apparently what family does. I picked her kids up from school more times than I can count, usually with a text that said only, "Can you?" no explanation attached, as if the sentence finished itself. Nobody in that family ever called it a pattern. They called it Denise being Denise. I was the reasonable one. The steady one. The one you called at 11 at night because you knew she'd actually pick up. Here's what nobody else in that family knew about me. 2 years ago, after the 3rd unexplained disappearance, I started keeping a private note on my phone, dates, amounts. Favors, the same habit I used at the hospital to track a family's reliability over time. I never imagined I'd need it at home. I told myself it was nothing, just numbers, just a woman being careful. You don't build a habit like that out of trust. You build it out of the slow, specific suspicion that someday you'll need proof of what everyone else agreed to forget. I never thought that phone, or that list, would matter beyond settling an argument at Thanksgiving. I was wrong about that, the same way I was wrong about a lot of things that October, standing in my kitchen with a wet note in my hand, about to find out exactly how far one family's silence could stretch before it broke. Something that couldn't be quietly fixed again. I got them inside before I let myself think. Towels first, then the stove light on for warmth, then 3 wet coats hung dripping over my kitchen chairs while I finally made myself read the whole note, not just the line that had stopped my hands on the porch. Watch them. I'm never coming back. I can't do this anymore. They're better off with you and Marcus. Please don't look for me. No signature. She hadn't needed one. I knew Denise's handwriting the way I knew my own. Marcus came home 20 minutes later to a kitchen full of children who weren't supposed to be there and a wife holding a note he read twice before his face went the color of the rain outside. He called Denise immediately, phone pressed hard to his ear, pacing the length of the kitchen like the motion might make her pick up. It rang once, then dropped straight to voicemail, the kind of silence that isn't an accident. "We should call someone," he said, already reaching for his phone again, and that's when I noticed it. Ava, 11, the oldest, flinched, a small full-body flinch, at the word police, quick and practiced, like she'd been braced for it before he even finished the sentence. I crouched down to her eye level and asked, gently, if she knew where her mom had gone. She looked at her little brother, then at the duffel bag by the door, and said nothing. Not crying, not scared in the loud, obvious way I'd expected. Just quiet, careful, watching us the way you watch adults when you've learned that what you say next matters more than what's true. I've spent a decade reading families in crisis. Panic looks a certain way. It's messy, it's loud, it leaks out sideways. This wasn't that. This was rehearsed. Somewhere behind that stillness, an 11-year-old had already been taught exactly what not to say, and to who. The first few days ran on routine, because routine was the only thing I had to offer 3 children whose entire world had just come apart on my porch. Lunches packed, homework checked, a nightlight left on in the hallway for the youngest, Theo, who wouldn't sleep without it. I kept my questions small and spaced out, the way I'd been trained to interview frightened families at the hospital, one thread at a time, never a pull. The duffel bag sat in my hallway closet for 3 days before I made myself go through it properly. Mostly clothes, a stuffed rabbit missing an ear, a folder of school papers. And underneath all of it, still sealed, 3 envelopes of certified mail addressed to Denise. The first was from a debt collection agency, a balance I didn't recognize, 5 figures, months overdue. The second was from a property management company, a final notice referencing something called the arrangement with Mr. Colton, as though I was supposed to already know who that was. I didn't. Not yet. It was Ava who gave me the name first, not on purpose, not all at once. She mentioned, folding laundry beside me on a Tuesday afternoon, that a man used to come by their apartment a lot toward the end. Colton, she said, like the word itself tasted wrong in her mouth. Her mom would send them to their room when his car pulled up. She said her mom stopped answering the door with the chain off. I asked, as gently as I know how, if her mom had been scared of him. Ava didn't answer that directly. She just said, Mom said she had to go somewhere he couldn't find her, but not us. Just her. 11 years old, and she already understood the difference between disappearing and running. That single sentence rearranged everything I thought I knew about that note on the porch. Quick pause here, because I need to say this out loud the way I couldn't back then. For years, this family called Denise unreliable. Flaky. Dramatic. Nobody once asked what she might be surviving underneath all of it. If you've ever watched a family hand someone a label instead of a question, tell me in the comments, because I think about that more than almost anything else from those 2 weeks. I still had access to a cloud backup account I'd set up for Denise years earlier, after she cracked a phone screen and lost 6 months of photos she cried over for a week. I'd forgotten it even existed until I needed it. I told myself I was looking for a phone number, a relative, anything. What I found instead was a folder of text threads between Denise and a contact saved simply as C. The messages went back 8 months. They started as reminders about money owed. They ended as something else entirely, specific numbers, specific dates, and one message I read 3 times standing alone in my kitchen at midnight. You know what happens if you're late again. I know where the kids go to school. I sat with that sentence for a long time. A mother doesn't vanish to escape a debt. She vanishes to make sure a threat like that never has to be tested. The next morning, I called a colleague from work, Priya, who runs our hospital's domestic violence advocacy program, the kind of quiet expertise you hope you never personally need. I didn't explain everything. I gave her the shape of it, the threats, the children, the note, and asked what I should do with what I'd found without putting Denise, or the kids, in more danger by moving too fast, or too loud, or telling the wrong person first. Her first question wasn't what I expected. She didn't ask where Denise was. She asked who else already knew Denise's new location, and whether I was completely sure it wasn't one of us. Marcus's parents arrived on day 9, furious in the specific, brittle way people get when shame needs somewhere to land. His mother wanted a missing persons report filed that afternoon, worded her way. Denise abandoned her children. Simple, closed, over. It would spare the family the ugliness of explaining anything further at church, at work, at the next holiday table. His father agreed before he'd even finished his coffee. For one long moment, standing in my own kitchen, I almost let them have it. It would have been easier. It would have protected Denise from a family that had already decided who she was without asking why. Nobody would dig further. Nobody would have to know about Colton at all. Then I went upstairs, opened the folder where I'd printed and organized everything, and found the message again, the one I hadn't been able to stop rereading. A date. A dollar amount. A threat specific enough that no vague police report would ever capture what it actually meant. That wasn't a woman who couldn't cope. That was a woman doing math on her own children's safety and coming up with one impossible answer. I closed the folder, walked back downstairs, and told my in-laws that we would not be filing that report. Not that version of it. Not tonight. Sunday dinner was supposed to settle it. That was the phrase Marcus's mother used on the phone, settle it, as if Denise's life was a checkbook that simply needed balancing before dessert. She'd set the table for 8, good plates out, the kind she uses when she wants a conversation to feel official. I brought a folder instead of a dish, and I set it on the table exactly where the centerpiece usually goes. I didn't raise my voice. I want that on the record before anything else about that night. I opened the folder and laid it out the way I lay out a case file at work, in order, so no one in that room could later claim they hadn't understood. The debt collector letter first. Then the landlord's notice, that phrase, the arrangement with Mr. Colton, read aloud slowly enough that it landed. Then the printed texts, the specific date, the specific dollar amount, the line about knowing where the kids go to school. And last, a drawing Ava had made for me without being asked, a gray car parked outside a building she'd sketched from memory, a man's shape leaning against the door. I've already given copies of all of this, I said, to a domestic violence advocate at my hospital. And to a detective in the next county who's already investigating a harassment complaint against a man named Colton. This isn't a theory. This is a file. Marcus's mother's face went through several colors before she landed on angry. You're making excuses for her, she said. You're always making excuses for her. She left 3 children on a porch, Renata. In the rain. She left them somewhere safe, I said, with people who love them, instead of somewhere she could be tracked down through them. That's not abandonment. That's the only version of protecting them she thought she had left. You don't know that. I have 8 months of messages that say otherwise. She opened her mouth again, ready with whatever came next, unreliable, dramatic, always something, and that's when Ava stepped out from the hallway. None of us had heard her get up from in front of the television. She stood in the doorway in her socks, small and very still, the way she'd been standing the night I first opened my door to her. The room went silent in that particular way a room goes silent for a child. Grandma, she said, quiet, plain, not performing it for anyone, Mom left the note so you'd take care of us instead of him finding us first. She didn't leave because she didn't love us. She left because she did. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Marcus's mother's hand, halfway to her water glass, simply stopped moving. It only takes one honest sentence from a child to end an argument built entirely out of a family's need to be comfortable. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. I just closed the folder, gently, the way you close a file once a decision has finally been made correctly, and asked Ava to come sit next to me while the adults figured out, for the first time that night, what they actually owed her mother. 2 weeks after that dinner, Priya called me at work, not at home, which told me before she said a word that this was the call. Denise had been located in another state, safe, staying with a cousin none of us had thought to ask about. The advocacy program had connected her case to an open investigation into Colton, stalking and extortion, tied to at least one other woman who'd come forward months earlier with a file that read almost identically to ours. He was arrested within the week on multiple charges, in a county that had apparently been building a case long before any of us knew his name. Denise came home 10 days later, thinner, quieter, careful in a way I'd never seen from her. She didn't arrive with an apology speech or a dramatic reunion at the door. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once laid out that folder, and finally told me everything, the debt that started small, the threats that didn't, the night she decided the only thing she could still control was who was standing between her children and him. I didn't know if you'd even open the door, she said. I always open the door, I told her, and meant it as plainly as she'd needed to hear it. The children stayed with Marcus and me through a supervised transition, 6 careful weeks while Denise found stable housing near her cousin and a protective order was formally put in place, one more document in a file that had finally been read by people with the power to act on it. Ava still calls me most Sundays, just to talk. Some habits, it turns out, are worth keeping on purpose. We spent years calling Denise unreliable. Flaky. Dramatic. It was easier than asking what she might have been surviving underneath all of it, easier than sitting with the possibility that her failures were actually a woman doing everything she could with almost nothing left to work with. That note on my door was never abandonment. It was the only goodbye a frightened mother could risk writing, the quietest, safest thing she had left to give her children. Here's what I know now that I didn't know standing on that porch in the rain. Real family isn't the people who judge you the moment you fall apart. It's the people who ask why before they ever ask why not. If someone in your life has ever been written off as unreliable, and you never got the chance to ask why, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, subscribe, because next week's story starts with a phone call nobody expected to answer.